Welcome everyone. In today's session, we will be discussing the most celebrated poem, Mending Wall by Robert Frost. To begin with, let me give you a brief introduction about Robert Frost. He is one of the most popular American poet of the 20th century. He has been very famous for his realistic portrayal of rural village, and the settings of most of his poems are life in rural New England, and his poems try to examine the complex and the philosophical question that the human beings are experiencing in their life. And for his remarkable contribution and achievement in the world of poetry, he has been awarded four Pulitzer Prizes for his poetry in his lifetime, and he has been nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature for 31 times. This poem, that is Mending Wall, is the first work in Frost's second book of poetry entitled North of Boston. So, through this poem, he has tried to explore the way people isolate themselves, both physically and emotionally, by building barriers like fences, not to derive a sense of safety. So before moving on to a detailed explanation of the poem, we'll just look into the form and the structure. So the poem Minting Bowl that is composed in blank verse, and the poet has used first person narrative. And the poem is full of poetical devices like metaphor, allegory, symbolism, and personification. And what is the theme of the poem? So the poem revolves around maintaining a wall between two neighbors. Every year, they meet to repair the stone wall after they found new gaps in it. So the narrator believed that there is no need of a wall, and he could not find a genuine reason for putting up the wall again. But his neighbor always wanted to have the wall there, as he believed in the old proverb, good fences make good neighbors. And the speaker also mentioned that something is there that doesn't like walls between men. So he assumes that it may be nature. So that is why the mysterious gaps appear and the boulders fall for no reason. But the neighbor, no way ready to heed to any reasoning. He simply repeats the age old adage like good fences make good neighbors again and again. So when we look into the title of the poem, Menting Wall, that is also ambiguous because the word menting can be used both as a verb and as an adjective. If we are using it as a verb, it signifies an act. So the act refers to mending or repairing the wall between the speaker and the neighbor. If we are taking it as an adjective, here that mending implies the distinguished relationship that the speaker and his neighbor share. That relationship they are trying to mend, not the physical wall. So now let's move on to a detailed explanation of the poem. The poem starts with an observation. The observation is made by the narrator, like something that doesn't like the wall. So the something here can be assumed the presence of nature, or we can say that nature acts as a third character along with the speaker and his neighbor, even though the presence of nature has not been explicitly mentioned in the poem. And the starting line refers like something instead of referring it as someone. So that shows that it is not the work of humans. It is not. It is a work of something that is natural. Okay, that is something, but that always wants to distract or disturb the presence of the wall. So the term wall here represents an example of a metaphor. So that metaphor can be applied both mentally and physically. So it's a kind of barrier. So it is a very powerful image that the poet has used in the beginning, the first line itself, that is something, and that causes the cold ground under the wall to swell and burst. So the ground burst in a way that the boulders come spitting out from within to the outside. So it shows that speaker again highlights here something wanted to keep the wall from being constructed So it compels from the natural action. So again, a beautiful use of personification that the writer has used here. It is, he wants to refer to the unseen force of nature. So the nature breaks the wall. So we know that only living objects or living organisms have the ability to break something. Here, nature has been given the humane quality, the power to break the wall because it does not like it to stay there. And then again, he goes on explaining the crumbling of the wall due to the natural activity. And because of that action, what happens, there is gaps are created and two people can pass through easily. And again, the speaker points out the work of hunters, that is another obstacle to the wall. And they cause damage to the wall during their sport, their hunting, and they don't make repair to those damages. And then again, that's why the poet has used a point here, I have come after them. So it may be because the wall restrict the hunters or the activity of the hunters. That may be the reason they are distracting, they are creating a kind of obstacle in the construction of a wall. And then the speaker continues to point out the trouble of hunters cause. They don't even hesitate to tear down the walls to find the rabbits. They will be hiding, those rabbits will be hiding inside those boulders in the gap. So in order to please their barking, yelping dogs, they are removing the stones and they are not ready to put it back. And despite various contributing causes for the wall being torn down, the fact remains that nobody knows or hears about how or when these gaps are formed. But the speaker certainly discovers the gaps at the spring minting time. And then he gives us a picture about his neighbor. And he says that he lets his neighbor across the dividing line know about the damages so they can repair them together. So one day they meet to go with the whole mending business as they do it every year. And the narrator again clarifies that they keep the wall in between when they do the mending job. So they notice that during the mending time, they notice that the boulders which have fallen to either side, and it has some shape. Some looks like loaves of bread, some are round as ball. So what they are indicating here, the difficulty in putting them to use. And even they felt that they need a spell. They should know some magic to balance these balls or stones back in that position. And it seems no matter what they do, the ball does fail to stick and it will fall down. So out of despair, the neighbor yells at the stone and to stay put until they turn their back. And they want to confirm that the wall stands intact, at least in their presence. So this indicates how difficult is the mending process, especially on a regular basis. And again, the poet has used a metaphor here when he was describing the stones that is fallen down, loaves and balls. And again, personification of the stone is given here because the neighbor is yelling at the stone. So usually we yell at only living objects or living organism. Here the neighbor is yelling at the stone as if he felt that it has humane qualities. So personification he has used here. And then he's mentioning about the fingers. So the fingers of the neighbor become very rough and callous because handling of this boulders again and again that made his fingers very rough. And they find the task just like another outdoor game. So with a wall line is there that demarcate the two opponents as if they are playing across the line. And this is the first time in the poem Mending Wall that the poet brings out the difference in opinion the speaker and the neighbor and his neighbor has. So the speaker says, as opposed to his neighbor, the presence of the wall is plainly unnecessary. He couldn't find any logic behind the construction of a wall. And he is totally skeptical of the wall, especially when there is no movable property under threat of moving into each other's land. And he mentions that they have two different kinds of orchard. The speaker also maintains that his apple tree won't ever cross to his neighbor's yard to cause damage to his pine trees. Similarly, the neighbor's pine trees are not going to come and disturb his apple. So hence, putting up a wall is obviously a futile exercise. It is of no use. But the neighbor is not ready to listen to the arguments that the speaker puts forward, and he only repeats or follows the adage, good fences make good neighbors. And this he has been believing this phrase for centuries or in different words and formations, because it has been given to him, handed down to him by his father. So it was a very popular, famous phrase. So it is a it consider it it has some old wisdom. When spring arrives, our speaker becomes a bit mischievous in his attempts to convince his neighbor to rethink his decision of putting up the wall and mending it when the gaps are visible. And then again, even though he tried to do that, he failed in his attempt. And in the coming lines, the speaker tries to convince his neighbor the other way and nearly accuses him of being a believer of these antiquated old traditions. And continuing with the same pace and tone, the narrator asks why the walls can make good neighbors. He seeks his neighbor's reasoning for putting up the wall, a purpose. And he argues that the walls are needed when there are no cows and that are needed to be kept from the neighbor's premises. But since here there are no cows, only trees, there is no need of a wall in between. And again, the argument continues, and they are walling in and walling out. The activity goes on. And he always asked what was being separated. Give me an answer. Give me a logical answer, a reasonable answer. Why it is needed. What we are walling in or what we are walling out. He also asked whether this wall would offend anyone. Again, the poet used another technique here in this form, that is alliteration, like what I was walling in and walling out. So to express his concern, he has used alliteration. And moreover, there seems to be a clever use of pun through offense, which sounds like a fence. And then again, the poet points out that there is something that doesn't love a wall and wants it to go down. And again, it invokes a sense of mystery in the minds of the readers about something. Still, we are not able to figure it out completely what it is. And the speaker is desperate to find ways to convince his neighbor otherwise. And he says that he could point towards else as a reason for bringing down the wall. That is mysterious. But he knows it is not really the else. So he suggests that the neighbor should come up with a reason for the same on his own. And then the allusion, else are tiny mythical supernatural beings that is usually present in folklore, the stories of the folk tradition. So maybe because of the play or the mischievous act of the elves are the reason for distracting the wall. Despite all his efforts and hopes and dreams of turning his neighbor, the speaker sees that the neighbor is again bringing stones, grasped firmly by the top in each of his hand. And when the narrator looks at his neighbor, he feels like he is like an armed old stone savage. A person comes from the pre-civilization era, totally unaffected by the speaker's intention and desires. And the speaker again believes that, or firmly believes that, the neighbor is living in darkness. Not just the darkness created due to the woods and the tree shades, but the speaker feels that the neighbor is under the tight grip of the darkness of ignorance. He is not ready to leave the age-old tradition. He's still clinging on to it. And the speaker says that his neighbor is unwilling to compromise his hereditary wealth, and he is unwilling to go beyond something his father used to say. He probably likes how well he can remember it. So the neighbor stands his ground and utters again, good fences make good neighbors. So when we look into the theme, the main theme of Mending Wall is the difficulty of change that we can bring in society. And social customs and traditions are very important for some people. And here Frost points out the struggle to change the same ones, those who are rooted in society. And at the same time, he wants to indicate, or he wants to pose a question to us, whether do we need a wall? So this wall can be a barrier, this wall can be a restriction, this wall can be a boundary that we are keeping in our life. So with this, we come to the end of the session. So thank you everyone.